The media. The media has sometimes been called the fourth branch of government. Of course, we know that there are only three branches of government, but why in the world would we be talking about the media in a government class? Well, the answer is kind of obvious because in our government, this is how we get information. We require, in fact, the whole point of a free press is so that we have a media that is not controlled by the government, because the media has such a huge influence on it, in that the role of the media is to educate us, to keep us informed. I mean, very, very few of us know a politician personally. And of those who know a politician personally, then even I would venture probably all of us don't know every one of our leaders personally. We don't know the president personally. We don't know the mayor personally. We don't know the governor personally. We don't know every single member of the state Congress or the United States Congress personally. So if we don't know these people personally, how do we know about them on election day? How do we know if they're doing a good job between elections, between one election and the next? So we rely on the free press in order to be able to get that information. In a dictatorship, one of the very first things that a dictator does is to take over the broadcast media and the print media. They control them. They actually decide what will be broadcast, what will be printed, and what won't. Because a dictator it's critically important for dictators to control the information that the public has access to. And so as a result, they control that information. They always keep their power that way. Well, we don't do that in the United States. In the United States, in fact, it's in our First Amendment that we will make, Congress shall pass no law abridging the freedom of the press. And that is deliberate because we don't want the government owning or controlling the media. Now, the fact is that the media is therefore free to do pretty much anything that it wants. So it'll come up, the question is, does the media always tell the truth? And we'll address that in a moment. The oldest form of media is the print media. Probably it goes as back to scratching on clay tablets with a stick. But certainly we attribute the print media as going back to the invention of the printing press. And even as early as the American Revolution, there were over 30 newspapers printing weekly newspapers in the American colonies. So we have a very long-standing tradition. And for more than 100 years, that's where most people got their information. They picked up the morning paper and they read what was going on in the world. They learned about politicians, events, sports, you name it. That's where you got your information. Well, in addition to newspapers, of course, we have news magazines. We have books published by various authors, including public figures themselves. Sometimes we'll write a book. Barack Obama, for example, has written a biography, as a number of famous people do. Billboards. We even get information driving down the highway. It's not a lot of information, but we can get information, and that's certainly part of the print media. But the print media is not where most of us get our information today. Most of us get our information today from, of course, the electronic media. And the oldest version of that is radio. And to this day, most, or I should say, millions of Americans still get a lot of their information from the radio because it's a convenient form. You can carry it while you're jogging or bicycling. You can turn it on in the car wherever you're going, and you can get information as to what's going on in the world. I don't think practically anywhere I drive, there's always a radio on where I'm getting information about what's going on in the world. Of course, even more people get their news by broadcast television, the big television networks, ABC, CBS, NBC. That to this day, those three networks have a not a monopoly anymore, but certainly a their lion's share of the news. But more and more people are getting their news from cable and satellite television, like CNN or Fox News, for example. And there's more and more of that. But if I had to have a crystal ball and I had to make a projection about what the future of news will be like, I'm going to project that most people eventually will still they will still listen to the radio, they will still watch the television news, they will still watch cable or satellite news, but they are going to get a huge amount of their information from the internet, because the newspaper can give you yesterday's news. Television can give you news at 6 and 10. The radio gives you at the top and bottom of the hour. But the internet gives you news that happened 2 minutes ago. And it gives it to you on your phone, on your tablet device, on your computer, at work or at home or wherever. And it is incredibly accessible. You want to learn more about whatever that story is, you can search for that story and find out more about it, and so on. So the internet is really a booming, and I think the way of the future in terms of news information. Now, it used to be that news networks and news organs and newspapers and so on had to give equal time to both sides of the story. They called that the fairness doctrine. It was a government directive to where, if, for example, that let's say that ABC had a Republican on the air talking for 5 minutes, they would have to put a Democrat on the air for 5 minutes to give equal time to both sides of the story. But in the 1980s, the government, the Reagan administration, decided that the fairness doctrine violated the Constitution. What part of the Constitution would the fairness doctrine violate? Well, the First Amendment. Yes, that very freedom of the press, because isn't, after all, the fairness doctrine stepping in and saying the government is telling news networks, you have to do this, you have to air this particular side of the story and this other particular side of the story. Well, the fairness doctrine has been eliminated by and large since the 1980s. And as a result, news networks will tailor their stories, which stories they choose to show and which stories they will not talk about, towards their political bias, their particular interest in politics. And it kind of depends on which part of the media that you listen to find out whether the news that they're giving you is filtered through a liberal or a conservative lens, a filter. So the old media is the traditional broadcast networks. That's ABC, CBS, NBC, a lot of newspapers like the Tulsa World, the New York Times, and so on, Washington Post. Those are the old media. I put CNN in there. They've been around long enough to where they're kind of in the old media club. They are politically liberal. They show stories that favor Democrats and liberal issues. And why can they do that? Because freedom of the press. It's their network. They can do what they want. In the same way, the new media, which consists largely of talk radio and web blogs, is as conservative as the old media is liberal. Guys like, for example, Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity, they will spend 3 hours a day beating up Democrats on the air. Why can they do that and say nothing good about liberals? Because it is, hello, the First Amendment, that freedom of the press. So they are allowed to do that. The question becomes, where do you get the truth? If the old media is only telling you liberal stories and the new media is only telling you conservative stories, who tells the truth? Well, I cannot answer that. You will have to decide for yourself, because I know that you have the ability to filter. I know you have the ability to sit there and listen and say, okay, yeah, these guys are pretty liberal and they're going to give me the story in a liberal way. Okay, these guys are very conservative, and they're going to give me a story that's very very conservative, in a conservative way. Only you can answer the question of who's telling the truth and who to listen to. Because if you like listening to, let's say, talk radio, then that may be a place where you get a lot of news. But understand, you need to filter it. If you like turning on CNN or MSNBC or ABC or whatever, you get your news that way, understand that that's fine, but you got to filter it. Just understand the filter. That's my message to you. Now, what happens if the government needs to get information out? There's really two ways that they can do that. One, we saw in the movie Dave, and that was a press conference. That's where we actually saw several of those in that movie, where a public official stands up in front of the media. The media's been called together at some location, and a briefing is delivered by that public official. It always comes in two parts. So write down these two parts in your notes. The first part of a press conference is always the prepared statement by the public official. The second part of the press conference are questions by the media. So, for example, a public official will get up there and they'll make this statement, and then the reporters will raise their hand and ask questions. And the questioning can be the majority of it, or the statement can be the majority of it. Just totally depends on the press conference. Sometimes a press conference comes out and they actually have no prepared statement. They've got 10 seconds worth of prepared statement, but then they take questions for half an hour. Or sometimes the prepared statement can be an hour and a half long speech, and they take like one question at the end of that. Or it can be a mix of the two. Now, there's another way that information can come out, and that is by a leak. A leak is an unofficial release of information. Like a press conference is very official. A leak is about as unofficial as it gets. A leak is where just one public official just kind of picks up the phone and calls a reporter buddy and says, hey, I've got this story. Now, a leak can be used where a press conference is not needed. If a story needs to be gotten out fast, where they don't have time to set up the press conference, or if it's just not all that much information and they don't need a press conference to do that. There's a darker side, though, of a leak, and the darker side of the leak is where an insider decides that, hey, what the government is doing is wrong, and somebody needs to report it. They call that a whistleblower. Now, a whistleblower then will secretly leak information to the media, and the media will then conduct an investigation and about this alleged wrongdoing. And sometimes they hit pay dirt. For example, a whistleblower is the reason that President Nixon had to resign the presidency, because a guy that he had passed over for FBI director got mad at him, and this guy knew everything that was going on with Watergate and that whole scandal. But none of Nixon's guys would talk. Well, this guy got mad enough to talk. And so he called up a couple of Washington Post reporters and gave them the whole story. And pretty soon they had this big investigation going that ultimately leads to Nixon's resignation. So leaks can be a way of getting information out as well.